Hey everyone, welcome to Jay Reviews. Now I know you're probably saying, Jay, we know why we're here, just get on with the review already. So I'm gonna do just that. Let's take a look at JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for the Super Nintendo. Next you're going to say, but Jay, how can you review a Super Nintendo game that doesn't exist? Well, you're only about half right. Let's get into it, and I'll tell you why. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a Japanese manga series that made its debut in Shonen Jump magazine in 1987 and is written and illustrated by Hirohiko Araki. The ongoing series centers around the Joestar family and is split into multiple parts, with the first focusing on Jonathan Joestar, who lives in 19th century Great Britain, and each subsequent part focusing on another one of his descendants. JoJo would go on to become one of the most successful manga series of all time, but it wasn't until 2012 when the anime series came out that it would eventually strike it big with Western audiences as well. So why is all this important? Well, it's because the JoJo game I'm reviewing today came out in 1993, and since that was nearly 20 years before Western audiences had any idea JoJo was even a thing, the game was understandably only ever released in Japan. This means that the only way for someone living in America like me to play the game would be to get a Super Famicom and a Japanese version of the game. But even then it wouldn't be very feasible to play since the game requires a lot of reading, and I can't read Japanese. Luckily I happened to find an emulated version online that was translated into English. Thanks Aeon Genesis. So without further ado, let's review this thing. I could give some backstory to what this game's about, but I'm sure the game itself will fill people in just in case they're not too familiar with the series. Alright, there's some guy in a blue outfit. Oh, get out, you're coming home. Who's that?
Get lost, old man. Sorry you had to come all the way from New York, but you're not gonna be any help here.
What? New York? Where?
Avdol, you're up.
Who? That's right, I also have what you call an evil spirit.
Whoa, hold on. So there's some guy in jail who doesn't want to leave, so some old guy comes from New York and tries to bring him back home, and then another guy comes in and starts talking about evil spirits or something?
Oh my god!
What's going on here? Right away, it's clear why this game was never released outside of Japan. It doesn't take any time to actually explain the premise of this part of the series and instead dives right in, expecting you to know everything already. So for those of you that have never seen or read JoJo, I'll fill you in. The game follows the events of Part 3 of the series, titled Stardust Crusaders. It focuses on Japanese high school student Jotaro Kujo, who one day finds out that he has some spirit inside of him that no one else could seem to see. Joseph Joestar, Jotaro's grandfather and the main character of JoJo Part 2, travels to Japan in order to help his disturbed grandkid who at this point has locked himself in prison to avoid hurting anybody with his spirit. Joseph, with the help of his good friend Avdol, informed Jotaro that the evil spirit he's concerned about is actually something called a stand, a powerful entity that is a physical representation of the user's fighting spirit, with most stands being invisible to non-users' eyes. The way they decide to teach him, of course, is by having Avdol fight Jotaro with his own stand. In-game cutscenes aren't out of the ordinary, but this part of the game is a bit strange, as it utilizes an auto-programmed usage of the in-game fighting system, not in a tutorial sense either, but just as a means to portray the fight between the two of them instead of actually animating a cutscene. Anyway, to put the rest in a nutshell, Joseph tells Jotaro that a wicked and seemingly immortal man named Dio has stolen the body of their ancestor, the very first JoJo, Jonathan, and has awakened from a 100-year sleep. Apparently Dio's awakening somehow triggered the stands manifesting in the Joestar family as well as others, and it's their duty to fight Dio before he uses his own stand for evil. When you actually get to control the game, you start off in Jotaro's room. As previewed in the prison scene, the game plays as a turn-based RPG, though the gameplay outside of battle is probably not what you'd expect. Whereas most JRPGs have a top-down perspective for exploring towns, encountering enemies, and generally progressing through the game, and older dungeon crawler RPGs tend to have a first-person perspective, JoJo goes in an entirely different route by having this close-up side-scrolling perspective where you can only walk on a two-dimensional plane. And for some reason the aspect ratio of the visuals are this super wide screen. It feels like I'm watching Ben-Hur or something. Actions you can do while in this mode include the standard checking your items, talking to nearby people, and checking your surroundings. The fourth option is called Tear It, which can be used once Avdol joins your team and you find cards for him to read, which will then give you a bonus. As if the side-scrolling RPG element wasn't strange enough, the check actions work like a point-and-click game, with you moving a cursor around to click on objects or people. This could have made things more interesting, but unfortunately none of the background objects in the game give any humorous or interesting dialogue when checked out, like many other games of this genre, and instead it just reveals an item if clicked in the right places. Sadly, this feels like a missed opportunity. Because of the side-scrolling gameplay style, there's virtually no exploring in the game, and you basically just walk in one direction until you either run into someone to talk to, or a cutscene, or an enemy to fight, such as these school punks. I guess Jotaro goes to the same school as Kuwabara from Yu Yu Hakusho. The battle system is extremely simple. Before the fight begins, you pick a random tarot card that can either strengthen or weaken one or more members of your team. Then you can attack any enemy you choose, which will either hit or miss your opponent for HP damage. Additionally, you can talk, which does the same thing except with a threat or insult that hits for MP damage instead. MP, I assume, stands for mental points. At first I thought that MP just affected your stats, but I discovered later that losing all your MP is actually another method to fall in battle. The most interesting action from this limited set of options is check. Oftentimes using it will just have your character sit there and not do anything, but occasionally they'll get an idea. This unlocks the submenu tactics, which contains the idea, guts, and sometimes run. Guts allows your character to perform a more powerful attack, and run is self-explanatory, but idea is something that only works in a specific situation. Most of the time it won't lead to anything, but you actually must check and then use the idea option in order to win some fights, usually against other stand users. It actually helps to know the source material here. For instance, Kakyoin is the one who figures out how to defeat Death 13 in the show, so he's the one who needs to come up with the idea in battle if you want to win. Otherwise, this fight seems to be unwinnable. The gameplay itself isn't all that amazing, meaning that the game mostly relies on its story to keep you interested. In a way, it actually follows the original quite closely, taking everything virtually step by step. But on the other hand, there's a lot of bizarre changes. For instance, in the anime and manga, the group come across a strange chimp on a huge ship whose stand actually ends up being the vessel itself. But in the game, the chimp stand is revealed to be this spooky vampire-filled mansion that's right down the street from Jotaro's house. This theme of running into random stand users in the wrong places and visiting numerous mansions that never existed before continues throughout the game. But the most ridiculous change of all comes before the final fight with Dio. Throughout the game, you find clothing items that can be equipped by your different party members in order to increase their stats, Jotaro having a preference for caps. Just before facing off against Dio, you find one final item in the chest, the time cap. As soon as you equip it, Jotaro asks why his friends have stopped moving for a moment. Yeah, I think you might see where this is going. So in the manga and anime, Dio's incredibly overpowered stand ability is revealed to be the power to stop time, making him seemingly unbeatable, until Jotaro unlocks the same ability with his own stand. However, it seems that this game has decided to explain how he was able to do this, with a little detail that the original story left out. Apparently it was this magical hat that he found that gave him the ability to stop time. Brilliant. There isn't really too much else to say about the game. The graphics actually look pretty nice for Super Nintendo, and the story is surprisingly faithful to the original most of the time. But the animation is extremely minimal, the strange gameplay limits you from doing much, and the random vampire mansions that seem to be placed just as filler and to have somewhere to throw in the random stand users does take a lot of points away from the fun factor. There also seems to be a glitch at the status screen where if you press the wrong button it soft locks the game, forcing you to restart from wherever you last saved. The patch notes claim that this was already present in the original game, so if that's true, then this is an absurd bug to leave in the final product. Then again, the patch notes also say that Joseph is Jotaro's dad when it's actually his grandfather, so who knows. If you're a big Stardust Crusaders fan, then you may find yourself enjoying this game, if at least to amuse yourself with all the silly changes. But if you're just looking for another RPG to play, I can't promise that this is the one for you. If what you've seen interests you, then give it a shot. Well, that that was JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for the Super Famicom. It definitely delivered on the bizarre aspect. Anyway, that's going to be it for this month's review. I'll see you next time on my winter special. How many days until that comes out, you ask? How many breads have you eaten in your life? Probably just at the end of the month like usual. See you then. Hey guys, if you like that retro style game remix of the JoJo Part 2 opening, then here's a link to the original and the channel to find more songs like it. As always, thanks for watching.